When I was a kid, the attic terrified me in a way I couldn't properly explain, and it wasn't the typical horror movie fear of tight spaces or cobwebs or creaking wood. It was something quieter and heavier than that, because our attic wasn't small or cramped like most people imagine. It was actually big, weirdly big, tall enough to stand upright anywhere without ducking, wide enough that it felt like a second floor instead of a crawl space, but the layout was wrong, like whoever built it had changed their mind halfway through. Beams cutting across at odd angles, some thick and solid, others thin and almost decorative, patches of flooring slightly raised or dipped just enough to make you stumble if you weren't careful. And the worst part was that you could never see the entire room from any single position. There was always something blocking your line of sight, always a corner just out of view. And as a kid, that drove me crazy because my imagination filled in those blind spots with shapes and movement that weren't there, or at least I told myself they weren't. And even though it was technically usable space, my parents treated it like a glorified storage dump. Old holiday decorations, boxes of faded photographs, lamps that hadn't worked in years, random furniture they couldn't bring themselves to throw out, and they avoided going up there unless absolutely necessary, which only made it feel more forbidden, more separate from the rest of the house, like it wasn't really part of our living space at all. Things started getting strange when I was around 14, old enough to be embarrassed by childish fears, but still young enough to feel them intensely. And one morning I woke up and noticed the bottoms of my feet were gray with dust, not just lightly, dirty but coated in that fine attic grit that settles over everything, packed between my toes, under my nails. And I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at them in confusion, because I hadn't gone outside, hadn't snuck downstairs, hadn't done anything out of the ordinary, so I washed them off and tried not to think about it. But then it happened again, a few nights later, and then I found a box of old photographs sitting in the middle, half of my bedroom floor. Photos I recognized from the attic. And when I asked my mom, she casually assumed I'd gone up there myself, which I knew I hadn't. And then a few days after that, an old brass lamp showed up on my desk, like it had always belonged there. And that's when the pieces started sliding into place, in a way that made my stomach drop. I wasn't just sleepwalking, I was going up into that attic in my sleep, navigating that uneven maze in total darkness without falling or hurting myself, which didn't feel possible, but my parents brushed it off as normal teenage sleepwalking, something I'd grow out of, and maybe they were right. Maybe that should have been the end of it, but the fear started building every night after that, because I would lie awake trying to fight sleep, terrified that once I drifted off, I'd climb that ladder again, and each morning became a ritual where I'd check my feet before anything else. Clean meant safety. Dirty meant I'd been up there, and then one night I woke up and it wasn't morning, and it wasn't my bedroom, and I wasn't lying down. I was standing upright in pitch black darkness, the kind of darkness so complete it feels solid, and it took a few seconds for my brain to understand what was happening. But when it did, I felt this cold wave of panic wash through me, because I was in the attic, somewhere in the middle of it, no light on, no idea where the hatch was, unable to see even the faint outline of the beams I knew were around me, and I didn't move at first because I was too afraid of stepping into empty space or tripping over something and crashing through the ceiling, so I just stood there listening to my own breathing until I became aware of something else, a presence, not something I could see or prove, just that jet in front of me. Convinced that if I made too much noise, whatever was deeper in the attic would move closer. And I don't know how long it took me to find the hatch, but when I did, I nearly fell down the ladder in my rush to escape, bursting into my parents' room, sobbing, and trying to explain that I had woken up standing in the dark and heard something up there, but they reacted the way parents do when they think their kid just had a nightmare. Calm, dismissive, reassuring. My dad eventually checking the attic and finding nothing, and they put a lock on the hatch after that, which seemed to stop the sleepwalking entirely. And maybe that should have been the end of the story, except it wasn't, because that same house had more history than I realized. It had been in my family for generations, and one Christmas when I was told to retrieve the decorations myself, I ended up stumbling across a heavy black box tucked into a far corner of the attic, sturdier than the cardboard around it, older somehow, and inside were dozens of handwritten pages from someone who had lived there long before me, entries that started off normal and gradually spiraled into obsession as the writer measured the attic repeatedly and claimed the dimensions didn't match the footprint of the house below, insisting there was missing space along one wall, describing cracks and marks in extreme detail, documenting late-night scratching and breathing sounds behind that wall, with timestamps like some kind of experiment, the handwriting growing frantic and unstable until the final pages dissolved into rows and rows of tally marks, counting something unknown. And when my father and I tore down that wall, we found a long hidden cavity running the length of it, several feet deep, its interior surfaces covered entirely in black symbols and markings that didn't resemble writing at all. And the worst part was that there was no visible entrance to that space, no crawl hole or doorway, meaning no one should have been able to get inside, which made the writer's detailed knowledge impossible to explain. And years later, after I inherited the house and began living there alone, taking late-night walks through the backyard while smoking and occasionally glancing up at the small attic window, I saw movement behind the glass not once but twice, there and discover the attic in complete chaos. Boxes overturned, thick black substance smeared wetly across the walls and ceiling as if freshly applied, deep gouges carved into the beams, only to have the police find no intruder and no point of entry, leaving me alone with the creaking silence of a house that had always seemed too large, too compartmentalized, too secretive for its own good. And even now, I haven't gone back up there to clean or repair anything, because some part of me is afraid that if I disturb whatever is up there, if I look too closely or try too hard to rationalize it, I might finally see something I can't unsee, something that proves the attic was never empty, that the missing space was never truly vacant, and that whatever stood behind me in the dark all those years ago might not have been trapped inside the walls at all,